Welcome to Season 2 of the Robertson and Easterling podcast. I'm Craig Robertson.
And I'm Matt Easterling. Craig and I are board-certified family law specialists with decades of combined experience serving Mississippians all across our fine state.
In 2019, we began to wonder if the struggles our firm deals with on a daily basis could be used to help the general public. And from there, the Robertson and Easterling podcast was born.
During Season 1, we had open and honest discussions with everyday people about their individual relationship journeys, some ending in heartbreak and others in redemption, but all with powerful stories to tell.
In this season, you'll hear more of the same real-life stories from other marriage and divorce survivors, which are sure to touch your heart.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. What you're about to hear is going to help. Welcome back to the Robertson and Easterling podcast. Today's episode is a special episode. Craig's not going to be with us, and I'm being joined by co-host Caylan Dunnells. She is an associate attorney here at Robertson and Easterling. Caylan, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
How long have you been working with our firm?
Well, I think I've been working here for a total of 5 years. I started as a law clerk when I was in law school, and now I've been a lawyer here for the past 3 years, going on 3 years.
Well, for those listening, if Caylan is half as good of a co-host as she is as an attorney, then this is going to be a great episode. Joining us today, our guest is Mike Byrd. Mike is a private investigator. And I know that in the time that I've been practicing family law, one of the most common things that people say to me in social settings is, can I be a private investigator? Do you need a private investigator? I think that would be so much fun. And today we have the real thing. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Mike, how long have you been working as a private investigator?
I started my company in 1997, so almost 23 years.
Wow. And is it as interesting as everybody imagines it is?
It can be. I typically tell people if it's an 8-hour surveillance, about 7 hours and 55 minutes is boredom. But you have to stay on guard because that 5 minutes is not going to happen again. You have to get it when it happens.
Tell us a little bit about your background. How'd you get into being a private investigator? What'd you do before that?
I was a police officer in the city of Pearl from 1979 to 1983, and I found out that they paid better in Dade County, Florida. So I left, went to the city of Homestead in the south part of Dade County, and worked there for 17 years.
And did you start doing private investigator work in Florida, or?
No, the last 5 years I was there, I ran the narcotics unit. And the majority of work that we did was surveillance work. And then when I took the early retirement and came back, I started thinking about what I was going to do because I still needed to earn an income. I decided that if I could surveil Colombian drug dealers and not get caught or killed, doing a divorce case would probably be easy.
So were you right? Is it easy?
It's more boring, I'll say that. But sometimes it's exciting. I'll be honest with you. To get the money shot on a cheater with a video camera is rewarding.
I bet. But what percentage of your work is done directed at adultery or people that are being suspected of having an adulterous affair?
You mean for my company?
Yes, sir.
About 85% of what I do is workers' comp fraud investigations for the insurance companies.
Okay.
And about 15% of it is domestic related.
All right. Which do you enjoy one more than the other, or?
I think I enjoy the divorce work more, having had a divorce. I know how important information can be, not necessarily to jam the other person up, but to allow an individual to make an informed decision about what they want to do. And I've had clients whose spouses I've caught cheating, who decided that they were going to work it out. And that's their decision. That's not mine. My job is just to go get them the information so they can make a competent decision.
In your line of work with it involving adultery and obviously high emotion at times, have you ever, during one of your stakeouts or investigations, felt in danger physically for yourself?
I did check a vehicle for a lady one time. She suspected that her husband had put a tracker on her car. So I told her to meet me at the Walmart. And she pulled up. She was in a brand new SUV, maybe a month old. And I told her to open the hood, and I was looking under the hood, and just as I went to shut it, I see a red truck coming across the parking lot at a high rate of speed. And I looked at her because her back was to the truck, and I asked her, what kind of vehicle does your husband drive? And she said, a red truck. And I said, well, there's definitely a tracker in your car. And she said, how do you know? And I said, because that's your husband coming across the parking lot. And
Oh, wow.
he came sliding up, jumped out, and he was ready to go at it. Fortunately, I was able to convince him that that wasn't something he wanted to do. And he ultimately left.
Yeah, I guess your experience as a police officer gave you the training to de-escalate the situation and
Absolutely.
be able to.
Absolutely.
So did this guy, do you think he showed up thinking you were the other man, or did he know that you were a private investigator that was looking for a tracker on the vehicle?
He had no clue who I was. So I'm assuming that he believed that I was a guy that she was fooling around with, because I asked him when he jumped out of his truck and started cussing at his wife. I said, who are you? And he said, I'm her husband. Who are you? And I said, I'm her private investigator. And at that point, he kind of calmed down. But I later met with her at her sister's house, and he had wired an iPhone into the electrical system of that new Tahoe back in the cargo area where the cigarette lighter plug is. So he was able to monitor her every move until I cut those wires.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that.
I still have that iPhone in my safe. She didn't want it back, and he didn't ask me for it. So,
How often is it that you're doing this counterintelligence type of investigation where you're helping someone, I guess, defend against a different private investigator or personal investigation by their spouse?
it doesn't happen that often, maybe only 5 times in 20 years.
So bring us in on the whole process. Usually, how does it start? How does somebody get in touch with you, and what are the next steps after that?
Typically, something happens, and the eventual client sees a receipt. They see a text message flash on the phone, and they become suspicious. And if they contact me soon enough, I can convince them that they don't need to leap forward and accuse the other person, because you don't know enough to do that. Sometimes a client can be their own worst enemy. I try to convince them to wait. Let's gather some more information. Depending on how savvy people are online, some people can check all their finances with a click of a mouse. And typically in most marriages, if the husband can do it, the wife can too. But she or he need to be careful when they go in and not trip any of those alarms that are out there. You know, used to you could go on someone's iPhone account and check the cloud or whatever. Well, now they have it switched around where if someone were to access my account, I get a text message. So you need to be sure of what it is you're going to try to do and what the dangers are of alerting the other individual before you do that. Because once they know that you're on to them, then it makes it harder to catch them.
Right. When people reach out to you about hiring you, is it usually the actual client that's reaching out to you, or are they usually finding you through their divorce attorney?
I would say the majority come through attorneys, but by the same token, about the same number come through referrals from people who have used me in the past. I don't advertise, and I've managed to stay in business, for 20 years, word of mouth. Whenever a guy starts talking about he thinks his wife's messing around and another guy overhears it who's been through it, he's going to offer up a name of somebody that can help. And the same if it's the wife. If she's talking in her circle of friends, somebody's going to know somebody who's been through the same thing, and then they're going to find out who to call.
How important is it for anybody that might be interested in doing some surveillance? How important is it to find an individual that has experience doing this?
I would say it's important, not just because that's what I do for a living, but the danger is to send a friend, and the friend gets caught, and now the cat's out of the bag. And either the individual's going to stop doing what they're doing for a period of time, or they're going to stop completely. Typically, they just stop for a short period of time, because if they're having an affair, they're going to want to go back and see that guy or that gal at the first opportunity. So I tell people all the time, and people tell me, Oh, I could do what you do. No, you couldn't, because you don't have the experience. It takes time to learn what you can and what you can't do. Sometimes clients don't understand when I tell them, we're not going to do that because the risk is too great compared to what the reward might be. I recently had a case. It was a situation where a spouse was being dropped off by a third party at dawn at their car. And when I rode by, I was able to get the target's car on video and the vehicle that was dropping the target off. But the client wanted to know why I didn't stop. And I said, because I don't have anything. Sure, that's suspicious. Sure, that's something we're going to have to look at, we're going to have to dig into. But even just to touch the brake pedal and have those lights come on would have alerted them to the fact that someone had seen them. I just drove right on by, just like I was leaving the neighborhood. No one would think twice about it.
Right. I imagine you probably have to deal with people that are pretty emotional from time to time and that have some trouble using their better judgment.
I had a client one time, and she was a lovely lady. She was in her late 60s, and I had worked the file. Her husband, she thought, was having an affair. I went to his office waiting for him to get off so I could follow him, and he wasn't there. Well, their house wasn't far from the office, so I went by the house, and there were police cars everywhere. So I called the attorney that was on the case and said, we may have a problem. I just went by the house, and all these police cars were there. Well, the attorney told me, said, well, just sit down the road and see what happens when everybody leaves. Well, sure enough, about 15 minutes later, police cars start leaving, and lo and behold, the client's in the back seat of one of them. So I called the attorney, and I said, we got a problem. The client's going to jail. Well, it turns out it was a shooting.
Oh, no.
Between the two spouses. And our client was the one, apparently, that they believed had instigated it. So that person went to jail. That's one of those far outside, on the edge of craziness. But you have to take each client individually on what you can and what you can't share with them as you progress in the investigation. Had a client one time, I'd followed her husband all over central Mississippi and finally put him at what we determined was the girlfriend's house. And followed them when they left there. They probably traveled 60 miles before they went to a restaurant to eat. So I texted the client who was out of town and said, just so you know, he's with her, they're at dinner. Everything that you suspected was going on apparently is going on. She texted back, thank you. And I'm looking straight through the window of the restaurant. Next thing I see is the guy pick up his cell phone. She called him.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Oh, gosh.
So he gets up, and obviously she said, I know you're at a restaurant with, this other person. And he stands up, comes outside in the parking lot and starts looking around because he knew at that point somebody was doing a surveillance on him.
And then everything just blows up.
Everything blows up, and I leave to go home. The client calls me, and she says, so what are we going to do now? I said, well, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm going home because you just messed everything up.
Right. Because, at that point, while practically speaking, and she knows that the relationship she was suspecting is happening, from an evidentiary standpoint, from a proof standpoint, you've really got nothing.
I've got two people having dinner.
Right. And that's it.
That's it.
They haven't even had an opportunity to stop on the side of the road.
Nope.
Well, so what are some of the different ways that you can surveil somebody?
I guess the first place to start would be the direct surveillance, where you would go and set up and monitor the individual when they leave. There's always the option of deploying a tracker in a vehicle. And that's quite cost effective for the client because using a tracker or an iPhone app, you can track that individual's movements and never have to be anywhere near them. And let's say that the tracker puts you at 310 Daniel Street in Jackson. And I would call your wife and say, who lives at 310 Daniel Street? Well, yes, I've just told her where you are. But by the same token, I don't know who your relatives are. I don't know who your friends are. She does. And if she says, I don't know, okay, the next time you go to 310 Daniel Street, I'm going, because I'm going to find out who lives there, and I'm going to find out why you're there. And sometimes if I can develop a pattern, I might even be there before you get there in anticipation of your arrival.
Mike, you said you've been doing this over 20 years, which, in our world, we know that throughout that time, technology has changed and advanced exponentially. So how has the advance in technology, social media, text messaging changed these methods that Matt was just asking you about to surveil people?
If someone can access their spouse's phone, they may find a treasure trove of information. I have a passcode on my phone simply because of the type of work that I do. My wife, on the other hand, knows that passcode. So if she wants to look at what's in my phone, she's welcome to anytime. I don't worry about that. But if for some reason you're married to somebody and all of a sudden they start locking their phone, that might be a clue that something's not right. And you can go online today. I use the AT&T service. I can go online today, pull up detailed billing on my phone, and see all the numbers, the calls. Now, of course, I don't know what the conversation was. I don't know what the content of the text was. But if you go and you look at your spouse's phone bill and they're texting a number that you don't know 400 times in a month, that may be a problem. If nothing else, you need to find out who that phone number belongs to. But, back in the day, you had to print those records out or get them from the phone company, and you had to go through them one by one. Not anymore. They open up in a PDF. You type the number in the search box, and it'll tell you how many times that phone number is on that bill. And that's certainly made things easier. Trackers have made things easier. They've come a long way in 20 years. When I first started, believe it or not, they used to use hunting dogs. They'd put collars on hunting dogs.
Oh, wow.
And they would triangulate where their dogs were using like a big antenna.
Right.
And that was what was used 20 years ago.
Wow.
And, you'd sometimes have to go to the top of the tallest parking garage in the area to try to get an idea of what area that vehicle might be in. But today, it'll pretty much put you in the exact parking spot at Walmart.
That's incredible. I had no idea that they used dogs to track people back in the day.
Well, so you were mentioning a couple moments ago about, looking up cell phone histories. And, I know I tell people very frequently when I'm doing consultations or meeting with new clients that, a phone bill can give you a wealth of information. But I also have people that say, I've looked at the phone bill and it doesn't seem like he's texting anybody. And I think it's important that people know, since most people have iPhones these days, iMessages, the little blue messages, will not show up on your phone bill. So just because there aren't, text communications there on that phone, doesn't mean that they're not talking to somebody.
That's true. And I think that revelation came out about 2 or 3 years ago. But by the same token, if you find a phone, a separate phone, because that seems to be the going thing now, is to get a Go phone. Go to Walmart and get a Go phone, and you can leave it in your car, and you can talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend and turn it off or leave it at your office, and your spouse will never find it.
A burner phone.
Exactly. And when you're done, you just throw it in the river.
Right. I know that, talking about the changes in technology, it's got to be so much easier to get caught in having an affair today. And also there seems to be much more, temptation out there as well with how small the world has become, reaching out to people on social media. There's just way too many incoming opportunities to,
and then how easy it is to act on those opportunities too.
Well, 20 years ago, you might sit around and wonder what happened to Bob that I dated in high school. And today, Bob's at your fingertips. You just go get on Facebook and you find Bob and you see what Bob's doing. And a lot of what goes on, I think, is initiated on computers. That's what gets people started. Because like I said, back in the day, you might have that thought and wonder, but you didn't act on it. And today, it's so easy to act on it, and who's going to know? You just go and you check, and the next thing you know, I had a case a few years ago where that's what happened. This woman went and looked at an old high school sweetheart and then came and saw him at his work and ultimately broke up his marriage.
Yeah, I've never sat down and done the actual numbers, but if I had to guess, Facebook or some type of social media is a part of probably 90 to 95% of my cases. Whether it was the cause of one of the initial problems, like what you're talking about, where you've reconnected with somebody or connected with a stranger, all the way down to just the stupid things that people will post on their social media profiles during a case. There is nothing more frustrating from an attorney's perspective when you've got a case that's going in the direction that you want it, you've got the facts the way that you want it, and then your own client sabotages the entire thing by writing something stupid on Facebook. Hey, I'm Matt Easterling. Thanks for listening to Season 2 of our podcast. I hope you're finding these stories insightful and comforting. If you relate to anything you've heard so far, or if you just want more information, you can request a consultation right from our website by completing a simple online form. Of course, you're also free to just give us a call. Family law is all we do. As experts, we have the information and advice you need to move forward, whatever that may look like for you. We would love to be in your corner. Until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy part 2 of today's show. You mentioned, people having passcodes on phones and starting to change their behavior and the way they interact with those devices. I know we always tell people if you notice things like somebody's buying new underwear or they just seem to be talking about a particular individual, more than they used to. From your experience, what are some other behaviors that you notice that might be a red flag?
Probably staying at work late is usually how they first start to explain it, because they can leave work at 5 o'clock and get home at 7 and say, I didn't leave work until 6:30, and how can you verify that? So if all of a sudden your spouse starts coming home late or leaving early or unexplained time on the weekends, you're married to a guy that all of a sudden just started deer hunting, okay? You might want to check and see if there's any mud on his boots when he comes home.
Right.
Typically there's going to be a change in their behavior. They will become secretive with the phone, the unexplained periods of time, and they will be agitated a lot of times. If you were to ask them a question, oh, you're accusing me of something. Well, typically when somebody gets angry and believes that a simple question is an accusation, they're probably on the defensive at that point. So maybe they do have something to hide.
Do you think that most people that are engaging in some type of affair, do you typically find patterns in what they do? Like, do they meet their significant other, every Wednesday or every 2 days at 2:30 or at the Red Roof Inn during lunch?
There are times when you work a case long enough where you can put together a pattern, but typically by the time it gets to my level and somebody's willing to pay my retainer, they have a good idea of what's going on. And sometimes they'll even have the name of the other person that they suspect, is the person involved. I know I worked a case 2 years ago where I met with a client, he gave me the information, and 2 hours later it was done. It was over. I had caught her. It was done. And typically that's not what happens, but it can happen just that fast. I met with him at 4 o'clock. She got off work at 5. He had gone by her office, put a tracker on the car. I'm down the street. She leaves. She goes straight to the boyfriend's house. I videotape her going in arm in arm with the boyfriend. And an hour later, I can leave.
So for anybody out there that's thinking about hiring a private investigator, what are some helpful things that they can provide to you to assist in your surveillance?
I often tell my clients to start a journal. In that journal, you'll put things that occurred on a specific date at a specific time. And I know people tell me all the time, oh, I'll never forget that, until they get on the witness stand. Then they can't remember for sure what day, what time. But if you have a suspicion and you start keeping a journal, you're going to find a pattern at some point that makes you suspicious to the level where you want to hire somebody like me. And the more information you bring in initially, the better it's going to go, the faster it's going to go.
Do you ever instruct people to, like, for clients themselves to do any type of investigation on their part outside and beyond what they bring into the arrangement between the two of you? Like, you were mentioning about how clients can look at phone records and, pay attention to certain behaviors. Once your investigation has started, do you ever instruct the client themselves to continue that type of investigation on their part?
Absolutely. And another thing, we talked about the phone bills, but credit cards. I have an alert set up on my State Farm Visa card that if a charge of $5 or more goes on that card, I get a text message. Well, if you've got a family credit card and you're not sure what the other person is doing with it, you might want to put that type of alert on there, on any credit card. Most people can put up their bank records online and look and see if an ATM charge was made at the Red Roof Inn. Most people are not that stupid. They're not going to use a credit card to rent a hotel room. I did one time have a client that paid cash. Her spouse paid cash for a hotel room, but kept the receipt. I mean, what's he going to do? Write it off on his taxes? But she found that receipt, and that was her red flag. First of all, what's he doing renting a hotel in the same town where we live? And number two, why is he keeping the receipt? And why did he pay cash?
Right.
Because he didn't want to leave a paper trail. But then he brought the roll of toilet paper.
But then he left a
him.
paper trail.
Exactly.
And, I know I've even seen people, I guess, become a step away from catching their spouse just by even looking at what at first glance would look like normal charges. So you see a charge at a restaurant. Well, that, at first glance might not be that big of a deal. But if you look at the amount, it's like, that seems like that's for more than one person.
That's right.
And then, well, how did you spend $50 at Nukes? Like that just seems like a lot, Who did you eat with when I was out of town? And, that people don't, in my experience, I think people that are having an affair, they are usually caught under some type of spell at that moment. And they don't make good decisions. They're going to do something that's usually going to get them caught. And, because all they're thinking about is the other person at that moment.
That's right. They're not thinking about their spouse. They're focused. They've got tunnel vision. And all they see is the goal for that day. And it's spending time with that other person. And you're right. They're going to make mistakes. You just have to be there and be ready. I worked a case recently where I ended up sitting with the video recorder in my hand for 3.5 hours. And if you don't hit the record button or change the focus, it'll shut itself down to save the battery on it. So I'm constantly, within every 3 minutes, having to refocus it so it doesn't go to sleep. But I was sitting outside a hotel, and my field of view, I was only going to have about 4 seconds to get the guy when he walked out. And ultimately, when he did, I was able to get that video because I was ready. If I left that recorder line on the front seat, reached to pick it up, turned it on, waited for it to activate, he'd have been completely out of view. So, yeah, sometimes it's boring. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. If you have enough experience to know that I'm limited to 3, 4, 5 seconds, that's going to be it. That's going to be the money shot.
What has been your longest single stakeout?
17 hours.
17 hours. Did you sleep during that time?
Nope. Didn't sleep. As a matter of fact, it was on a New Year's Eve. And I knew that the wife was in an apartment with her boyfriend. So I got there New Year's Eve, mid-afternoon. And back then I worked out of a van. So it was great. I just got in the back of the van, had a lounge chair. I could, sit there with an ice chest and look out the back window at the guy's apartment door. They didn't come out until the next day. But 17 hours later, it was done.
And you got your evidence.
Got what the client needed to successfully get a divorce and not be taken to the cleaners at the courthouse.
So you got them going in, had to wait 17 hours, and then you got them coming out.
I didn't get him going in. I knew who he was and where he lived, and I knew her car was in that parking lot. So obviously, she's in his apartment.
Right.
If I had gotten him going in, I could have left after an hour.
Right.
But because she was already in there, I had to wait till they come out, and it wasn't until the next day.
As divorce attorneys, one of the most common questions that we get is, how long is this thing going to take? Meaning the divorce itself. And, sometimes we have cases that are over immediately, and sometimes they take years. What's been your longest overall investigation in a case?
Off and on over 11 months.
That's in a domestic relations case?
Yes. It turned out the spouse was very smart and was also wealthy. So he was able to do things that the average person could not do. And he had moved out from the house and was staying at an extended stay hotel. And I would go by, check and see, only found his car. Every time I go out on a surveillance, typically I'll shoot just a little bit of videotape, even if I don't see the target, just so I can prove that I was there if there was ever a question. Luckily, that's what I did on this case, was I randomly shot videotape of the parking lot and the cars that were there, people who might be walking across. And it wasn't for 9 months later did I realize that a lady that was on that tape from the very beginning was the paramour. But it took 10 months to figure it out.
Just that the red Honda Civic seemed to always be in the parking lot?
No, we didn't know who the paramour was for 10 months.
Right.
And ultimately, once we found out who she was, he had moved out of the extended stay hotel. He had bought an RV, and the RV park wasn't 5 miles from my house. So every day when I would leave to go on a case, I'd go by there, see if there's another car parked at his RV. Never found one. And then I told the client, I said, listen, you're going to have to do something to help yourself. I can only do so much. And to be honest with you, she would call, multiple times in a week. And I just have to tell her, I'm not going to go because I don't think I can do you any good. And that's not how I do business. You've got to help yourself. And ultimately, she came up with an email address. And once I had the email address, I found out who the female was. And then I found out what she drives, because she didn't even live within 50 miles of this RV park. And then the very next Saturday, I rode through the RV park. Only his car was at the RV, but in overflow parking, there sat her car.
What's the farthest you've ever had to go to catch somebody geographically?
Pensacola, Florida. But I have gone as far as Fort Myers on a case.
It's a very complex dynamic that's going on anytime that I have a client that hires a private investigator, because they want to know the truth. They want to know what's happening. But, sometimes the surveillance, you just don't get anything. And that might be because they just didn't happen to be, doing anything wrong during the time that they're being surveilled. And sometimes they weren't actually having, an affair at all. And I always find it very interesting to see somebody's reaction when that's the case. Sometimes it's relief, and sometimes it is, just anger. Like, what do you mean you didn't catch me doing anything? Well, we've been watching him for 6 months now, and maybe he's just not having an affair. How often do you run into that where somebody just doesn't want to accept whatever the apparent reality is?
I have them sometimes that don't want to accept the reality the other way as well.
Right.
It happens both ways. They'll look at a video and be in complete denial. And then sometimes, very rarely, is there one where we don't find anything. Because like I said earlier, typically when it gets to the point where somebody's going to pay for a private investigator, they pretty much have enough chips on their side that they believe that something's going to happen. And that's the way that I approach every case. I believe that if they've gone forward and hired me, they have a belief, so I have to believe in their belief.
Mike, I know everybody that's been listening today has been totally entertained. As we start to wrap this up, do you have any other tips or helpful do's and don'ts that anybody that might be considering hiring an investigator or who already has that they can do as their case evolves?
I think I said in the beginning, oftentimes the client is their own worst enemy. If you suspect something's going on and you can do a little checking on your own to kind of bolster your belief or to lead you ultimately to believe nothing's going on, that's great. But at the point that you hire a professional to take care of the problem, it would be as smart as me hiring you, Matt, to represent me in court. And then when we get to court, I tell you to sit down and shut up. I'm going to do it. That makes no sense. So oftentimes the client is their own worst enemy. So get together the facts that you think would lead me to believe that something's going on. And I'll be honest, I've looked at facts that people have brought me before and told them, I don't think you've got enough. I don't think you know enough about what it is you don't know yet. Okay? So you're going to have to do something to lead me to believe that if I take your case, I can help you. Because if I don't think that, I'll turn you down.
Okay. If somebody's coming to meet with you, is it helpful for them to bring, license plate numbers, photographs of their spouse? If they have a specific person that they suspect, a photograph of that person, maybe even their license plate, anything like that is helpful for people to bring?
It's always better to have more information than you need than it is to need more information than you have. So the more that you can bring to the table, the faster it's probably going to go. I've had clients show up with pages of information, Facebook, addresses for suspected paramours, be it the husband or the wife, car tags, addresses, places of employment. And some people look at me weird sometimes because I'll ask them, I'll say, well, if your husband doesn't come home, he goes out and has a few drinks, where does he like to go? Why? And the client's like, well, why do you want to know that? Well, one of two reasons. Either I'm going to check that place, but if you go there with him often, he's not going to go there. So that's a place I don't have to check. So sometimes I have to ask them questions and pull the information out of them. And a lot of times people know a lot more than they want to admit to, because there's always that the back of your mind saying he or she would never do that to me.
Right. Mike, thanks so much for being here today. How can somebody that might be in need of your services, how can they find you?
I'm on the internet, michaelbyrdinvestigations.com. Or you can call my office, 601-829-0111.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Robertson and Easterling podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
If you need our help, we would love to hear from you. You can request a consultation from our website 24 hours a day, and it takes less than 5 minutes. If you like our show, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite podcast player. We want you to be one of the first to know when our next episode drops.
Have a great rest of your day, and remember, there is nothing wrong with arming yourself with information. On behalf of the Robertson Easterling family, thanks for spending time with us.
This podcast is not a substitute for an attorney. All information is provided as a general reference and public service. Listening to this podcast does not create a professional relationship with Robertson and Easterling or any of its attorneys or guests. This podcast may be considered advertising under applicable rules, and therefore free background information is available upon request. For a full disclaimer, please visit our website, www.robertson.ms.